Nearly a decade before John Galsworthy published The Man of Property in 1906, the best-selling first volume of the Forsyte saga, and nearly 2 decades before he published To Let in 1921, which is the trilogy's concluding volume, a group of concerned citizens who, quote, cared for literary associations, banded together to rescue and rehabilitate Thomas Carlyle's house at 24 Cheney Row, Chelsea. Beginning in 1894, at Lumsden's insistence, an urgent campaign was launched by literary fans and cultural elites to restore the dilapidated house to its former respectability. A committee was formed. Notices soliciting contributions to a fund were published, like this, in major newspapers at home and abroad. Illustrious donors were secured, including a German royal. And the house was purchased in 1895. Restoration began immediately to erase all evidence of tenants since Carlyle's death in 1881, and the recollection of his personal possessions and furnishings commenced in full force. In July 1895, almost right on schedule, the restored residence, reincarnated as the brand new Carlyle House Museum, opened to the public. 1,000 visitors were reported within the first 6 weeks. They paid a shilling admission fee, received an illustrated descriptive catalog of books, manuscripts, pictures, and furniture exhibited therein, which narrated the process by which the house was reclaimed and woven excerpts from the Carlyle's letters relevant to the house. They saw firsthand the great critic's writing desk, viewed the, quote, very large sofa of beech with the front and arms carved and stained, that Jane Welsh Carlyle bought secondhand in 1835, and they appreciated the repeating clock, an 8-day spring striking and repeating clock in Gothic-shaped rosewood and ebony case, an ornamental bracket. This was afterwards fixed. So the catalog footnotes all this information. This was afterwards fixed on the east wall, halfway up the stairs to the drawing room. The catalog commingles intricately and intensively subjects and objects, the inhabitants of the house, and the artifacts surrounding them, giving them equal import. The Carlyle House rehabilitation intersected with the heyday of literary pilgrimage when it became popular, as Nicola Watson discusses, to visit authors' birthplaces, graves, homes, and the settings found in their works. This resulted from a mixture of local and national pride, romantic interest in personality and genius, and a new desire to get in touch with history where it was made. This practice also occasioned a rise in sites designed to accrete, secrete, and authenticate memories of writers and of works, affecting in aggregate a mapping of national literary heritage onto a national mythic geography, and that's all Nicola Watson. Galsworthy was acutely interested in how such literary heritage sites represented archives of cultural memory, and he was likewise preoccupied with the museal function of narrative forms, with the ways in which novelistic structures parallel and produce archival patternings. His novels are attentive to the physical structures of such archives, the architectonics of museums, and other archival spaces, such as like a club. Indeed, Galsworthy described his novels themselves as museums, and much to the dismay of experimental modernists like Virginia Woolf, loaded them with all manner of Victorian trappings. The Literary House Museum, in Galsworthy's fiction and in Carlyle's fact, acts as a fulcrum then for Victorian nostalgia, historic preservation, nationalist pride, and commercial enterprise. The highly publicized Carlyle House inspires a subplot in Galsworthy's novel To Let, when in the shadow of the Great War, Soames Forsyte attempts, from motives both whimsical and nostalgic, to redeem the myriad Victorian-era accoutrements piled up in his elderly Uncle Timothy's home in the Bayswater Road by converting the site into a house museum. If people can't be brought back to life, their domestic spaces can be reassembled, their housekeeping reenacted, resurrecting something of the soul of times past. Soames muses, quote, "There are houses whose souls have passed into the limbo of time, leaving their bodies in the limbo of London," end quote. Some such houses, it seems, may be released from limbo, as 24 Cheney Row had been, but Galsworthy is no hopeless nostalgic. Instead, his fiction questions the very techniques of museal remembrance as well as the underlying cultural politics of such presentation. Given his enduring reputation as a historian and social critic, it's no accident that Carlyle finds his way into Galsworthy's backward-glancing satire. On one level, To Let is a soap operatic comedy of manners, yet we might also uncover there a brooding meditation on how we remember an age, on the forms of cultural preservation, on the forms that cultural preservation may take. The novel is about looking back, but also about change and about a new century, so looking forward. Within the architecture of the narrative, history and memory occupy literal real estate. Houses can have souls, and the objects inside can be dead or alive. In its etymology, of course, nostalgia unites the yearning to return home in space and time, the nostos, right, with the painful impossibility of ever doing so, the algia, the sickness. Both nostos and algia emerge in Galsworthy's treatment of Victorian house museums, the desire to evoke and inhabit the ethos of a bygone time and place, chafing against the realization that one can never repeat the past, only remember it, and possibly, Soames hopes, replicate it. That nostalgia can be as much an economic as an emotional mode is evident in the creation of Victorian-style house museums like Carlyle's, a process that transforms previously personal domestic property into public commodity. In fact, Galsworthy's depiction of the Bayswater House Museum in Gillette shows signs of what Paul Grange terms the nostalgia mode, where the past is revamped as a sellable simulation or a commodified style, though in this case Soames misjudges badly the vintage market. Galsworthy's curation of Victoriana and Soames's imagined conversion of Uncle Timothy's house to a museum details objects, which are often natural, deeply associated with the era of empire, middle-class domesticity, scientific classification, and naturalist hobbies. All these Victorian remnants are imprinted on the materia decorating the Bayswater Roadhouse. The Bayswater house is saturated with Anglophilia, and equally with Soames's desire to pass down to future generations this version of respectable Englishness, awash with its overtones of class pride, an impulse Nicola Watson expostulates in her analysis of literary tourism and the cultural nostalgia for perceived Victorian duty to the past, to family, to nation, to empire. Galsworthy's painstaking attention to the very Victorianness of decor, taste, and atmosphere, rarely a page goes by without reference to old masters, drapery patterns, the quality of the old Worcester porcelain, underscores the novel's museal function of memorializing an era by collecting, curating, exhibiting, and thereby preserving telling artifacts. Like any exhibit, curation omits more than it selects, elides more than it presents, and thus reveals only a partial history. The Forsyte Saga may well be, as Galsworthy claimed, a figurative museum designed to, quote, embalm the now extinct species of the sense of property. But the Family Chronicle, as Barbara Black rightly contends, proves museal most profoundly in the less reverential sense of preserving in order to dissect. Galsworthy offers near perfectly preserved specimens of Victoriana in order to expertly dissect not only any lingering nostalgia for high-born proprietorship of an older era, but also the way that museal practices may try to trade cheaply on such nostalgia, both through Soames's management of the hypothetical Bayswater House Museum and through the novel's self-reflective portrayal of nostalgia as a public commodified mode. As Kate Hill explains, quote, by the end of the 19th century, it was necessary for museums to constitute a space for the production of public and private memories that linked the visitor with a past from which they felt they had been severed by urbanization, industrialization, the growth of capitalism, the development of mass cultural forms. This process of assembling history through artifacts, the nostalgic Edwardian impulse to memorialize and maintain the preceding Victorian age via telltale objects, is illustrated when Soames contemplates opening the house to the public once the reclusive centenarian finally dies. Referred to as, quote, the mausoleum by the younger Forsytes, Timothy's is a house of the old people, of another century, another age, arranged to the old pattern in every detail, right down to Smither, the faithful and corseted elderly servant who's been answering the door and dusting the family relics for 45 years. Across paragraphs and pages, from wainscoting to their chair coverings, Galsworthy catalogs and details the interior appointments of the dining room, study, drawing room, even the stair landing. That's where the hummingbirds are. Every room, each knickknack is so saturated with the past. They recall a memory, bring forth ghosts, and they all make Soames feel, quote, choky. The house is indeed a tomb, and time has, for all intents and purposes, stopped at the Bayswater Road. Uncle Timothy is the last remaining early Victorian Forsyte. He's essentially the living dead. He's not quite dead, but no longer fully alive, buried up in his bedroom where he's wholly oblivious to the air raids that periodically shake the house. Appraising the house with his discriminating connoisseur's eye, Soames notices that the dining room is, quote, unchanged in soul or body since he was 4 years old. A copy of the Times, dated before the war began, lies open in the study where Timothy left it years ago. The drawing room is likewise suspended, dusted, uncovered, aired daily, quote, precisely as if his aunts still dwelt there patiently waiting, and they've been dead for years. With its stubborn homage to the past, its inability to engage with the present or to adapt, it's true that the Bayswater Roadhouse resembles nothing so much as a mausoleum, except, of course, for a museum as another space of suspended temporality, different brand of kind of undeadness, maybe. Shrewd, calculating, and not typically sentimental, Soames is nearly overcome during his lonely, self-guided tour of the house as the memories come crowding back, triggered by evocative objects, what Sherry Turkle would call evocative objects, and those are objects that don't really have any exchange value, right, or maybe not even aesthetic value. She wants to get beyond that. She's talking about their kind of emotional resonance. Stretching into the deeper past of Forsyte family history, he gazes on the childhoods of deceased elderly aunts and uncles, studying the miniatures on each side of the drawing room door, done about 1830, he thinks, when, quote, miniatures were considered very genteel and lasting, too, painted as they were on ivory. Here on the wall, the youth and vitality of his departed ancestors are preserved. The past lasts, right, lives on in these objects and these mementos of empire and prosperity, in once stylish ornaments that even by the Great War, Soames finds charmingly old-fashioned and passé. The fragile taxidermy hummingbirds will crumble, just as the Forsytes, quote, in full plumage, must all pass away. Miniatures are no longer genteel must-haves. Ivory is harder to come by. As Soames, the acquisitionist, well knows, these items are imbued with personal, emotional, rather than exchange value. Galsworthy's catalog unsettles subject-object duality, from the undead Uncle Timothy to the stuffed hummingbirds to the scorpion and elephant tusk. For these once living, now dead relics simulate an attempt to capture life. They continue to persist in the present, but in a kind of zombified existence, the afterlife of the undead. It is the poignant authenticity of this time capsule of an interior that calls to Soames's mind, seemingly out of the blue, the Carlisle house. A thought came to him. When Timothy died, why not? Would it not be almost a duty to preserve this house like Carlisle's and put up a tablet and show it? Specimen of mid-Victorian abode, entrance 1 shilling with catalogue. After all, it was the completest thing and perhaps the deadest thing in the London of today, perfect in its special taste and culture. The house will become a specimen, as Soames imagines it, classified, encased, and on display, like the dead hummingbirds under glass on the stair landing. In the manner of the famed Carlisle House Museum, Soames similarly envisions enshrining Victorianness within the walls of Uncle Timothy's house, its completeness sealed in its deadness, again culturally rhyming mausoleum and museum as archives of dead materials. Soames's choky sense of duty to Uncle Timothy's echoes in tone and substance the creation of cultural sites at the turn of the century, the publicity related to the metamorphosis of 24 Cheney Row into the Carlisle House earnestly promulgated the sacredness of historic preservation, the reverential obligation to rescue and rehabilitate the house as a place of literary pilgrimage. The Bayswater Mausoleum and the Carlisle House Museum offer contrasting fates that embody the construction, curation, and naturalization of cultural history and collective memory. Carlisle's former address is filled back up with the reacquisition of his personal possessions, furnishings, and evocative objects. The Bayswater Roadhouse is drained. Uncle Timothy cannot, of course, live forever, and Soames cannot preserve the Victorians by displaying the Bayswater house to the public. He can't even pack its contents away in a lumber room, which he considers. The house is to be sold or let, and beyond a handful of heirlooms, and of course the truly valuable, i.e. marketable pictures, the contents are scheduled to be auctioned. As a Forsyte who values property above all else, Soames is, after all, the man of property of the saga's first novel, who has the, quote, possessive instinct, and who spends his life acquiring a collection of important works of art simply because they are important works of art, the dispersal of the Bayswater house is Soames's worst nightmare. The public does visit the house, not as a museum, however, but to snap up bargains at an estate auction, which, quote, scatters the Victorian ashes of the Forsytean possessions among little dealers and the housewives of Fulham. Far from paying a shilling for admission, the public isn't even buying at rock-bottom prices. The soulful family relics devolve into second-hand bric-a-brac before his eyes. The nostalgia mode for Victoriana is in this case fully outmoded. Uncle Timothy's mausoleum of a home is emptied of meaning. Its remains scattered into anonymity. This is also a very painful scene. Unlike 24 Cheney Row, Chelsea, here in the Bayswater Road, there remains no afterglow of literary genius to spark the public interest and fire the market engines of mode nostalgia. Soames himself bids £5 for Aunt Anne's sofa when it doesn't sell for 30 shillings at auction. Galsworthy's To Let suggests that novel readers and museum visitors share a desire to be haunted by the past, to enter a structure of collected memory. The novelist curator of the Novel Museum calls attention to the various spaces and modes of historic preservation and to how these houses and the objects collected within shift from private to public view. Moreover, house museums, museum catalogs, and novels also shift from physical to digital planes. They're now adapted to screens and available online. Houses and occasionally old-fashioned writers re-enter the market. I don't know about Carlyle, but his house is now operated by the National Trust, and there are likely more visitors to Carlyle's former home today than readers of the works he wrote there. I don't know how many students are reading French Revolution, but maybe there are. Galsworthy's own addresses have been reincarnated in various capacities. One in London has been transformed into a care facility, I think specializing in memory care for Alzheimer's patients. And Wingstone Manor in Dartmoor was on the market in 2009 for like £1.55 million, but I think now is a bed and breakfast. The foaming waters of change that Soames sagely meditates upon in Highgate Cemetery during the novel's closing scene at the Forsyte family vault, the real mausoleum, where Victorianism lay buried, continue to roll right along, flowing in, around, and across various times, spaces, media, and roaring off into as yet uncreated futures.